don't know how many times I gotta say this, but the N64 controller is a damn travesty. Has anybody ever held it like this? Why is that third prong even there? At the time, nobody really knew what the best way to control 3D games would be. If we're adding a third dimension, then obviously the answer is adding a third hand. And don't even get me started on the thumbstick. Anyway, now there are a ton of modern options available for controlling the N64, and today we're looking at one made by Hyperkin. It's called the Admiral. It has a lot of very niche features, and you can also get it to work on your Switch if you really wanted to. Now all we need is Nintendo to give us a good reason to want to do this. I first got a look at the Hyperkin Admiral back at E3 this year. It was one of the most exciting things that we got to see at the show. But what it was attached to was a little bit more exciting. That was the Retron Alt, which was a full-fledged software clone of the N64. Yes, I said software, but yeah, I know software, but at least it'll be cheap. And you know you play these games on your computer now anyway. Anyway, I'm a big fan of these modernized N64 controllers. It makes playing these N64 games a little bit more bearable. A lot, maybe even most of these games haven't aged well. Having a controller that's a little more modernized and a little more comfortable eases that transition a little bit. This controller is slightly reminiscent of the Hori Mini Pad. That controller was not popular during the N64's life cycle, but sometime between the death of the N64 and this resurgence of modernized retro hardware, collectors bought up all of the Hori Mini Pads and drove the prices way up because there was nothing else on the market. So now, with the rise of this modernized retro market, a few companies have tried their hand at recreating the N64 controller. Retrobit actually has a tribute to that Hori Mini Pad called The Tribute, if you want to get your hands on that for way cheaper. I've already talked about the Retro Fighter Brawler 64 controller that came out almost 2 years ago now. But right now we're talking about the Admiral, the new challenger. Its features include wireless functionality via Bluetooth, meaning it can also connect to a PC, Mac, iOS, or Android device that also has Bluetooth. It can connect to a Nintendo Switch if you purchase Hyperkin's N64 USB adapter for around $13. It has a 6-hour battery life, which I have yet to charge, so there's at least some truth to that. Perhaps the most interesting part is that it has a controller pack expansion slot, just like the OG N64 controller has. But it's on the dongle. And that dongle also has an SD card slot for transferring saves. It's not as exciting when you actually put it into practice. The controller pack slot is probably useless to most people. But we'll go more in depth into that aspect of it later. Right now, if you're getting this controller, you probably want to know how it plays. And it plays fantastic. The thumbstick is light years better than the N64 thumbstick. Unless you have a brand new one out of the box, your N64 controller probably has a wobbly-ass thumbstick. This thumbstick is a little small compared to other modern controllers, but honestly feels super comfortable. It's snappy and responsive and has the octagonal divots that people are into for some reason, even though the N64 controller recognizes all 360 degrees of movement. All right, so I know that the N64 controller can register all 360 degrees of movement, but it looks like most games just take the 8 directions. Okay, I'm wrong, I admit it. Anyway, this is the best thumbstick I have ever felt in an N64 controller by far. The D-pad and the rest of the buttons are also very solid. They're flat and just a little clicky. There's a Z button on both shoulders, which could be a little confusing, but necessary given how the OG N64 controller works. Most importantly, it's comfortable in the hand. It's a very well-made, solid controller. The Brawler 64 feels a lot cheaper by comparison. I liked the thumbstick on the Brawler 64 a lot until I felt the Admiral. The Brawler 64 is still a great controller, don't get me wrong, but for the same MSRP, I think Hyperkin's kind of giving them a run for their money. You might be able to save $5 on the Brawler 64, but that isn't a lot compared to how much more you get with the Admiral. Wireless usually isn't a big selling point to me, but the N64 controllers typically have pretty short cables, so The wireless does make a pretty big difference here. I actually didn't even think about Retrobit's Tribute controller until I started making this video. It's only 25 bucks, so it might be worth looking into if you want something a little bit cheaper. Unfortunately, I haven't gotten a chance to try it out myself, but if you want a wired controller and you don't want to spend too much money, 25 bucks, you're not risking a lot. The button layout on the Admiral is just fine, if not better, for every game that I tried out. The same goes for the Brawler 64, since it has the same button layout. Get this controller if you play a lot of N64 or you want to play a lot of N64 on an actual N64. I did hook this controller up to my MacBook via Bluetooth to use it on my emulator of choice, OpenEMU, but I couldn't for the life of me get all of the buttons to map right. Maybe you'll have better luck with your emulator of choice. My PC does not have Bluetooth, but I did try to hook it up via that USB adapter that I bought additionally. It seems to recognize the adapter, but it doesn't recognize it as a controller, so I couldn't map the controller to any program, not even Joy to Keys. So make sure you have Bluetooth before you try this out with some emulators. Like I said before, it does work with the Switch if you get that extra USB adapter, and it works pretty damn well. It seems like the C-stick is mapped to the right analog stick, which it should be. The only N64 game that I know of that's on the Switch is Turok. And boy, they did nothing to polish that game up. I completely forgot how ridiculous this game is. It would be amazing to have GoldenEye like this with this controller. The Admiral works perfectly here. The only thing that I had to do was switch the functionality of the L and Z buttons, which was easy enough to do in-game. So if anybody decides to release more N64 games, like, I don't know, maybe Nintendo, then this controller would be fantastic, as long as that app had decent button remapping options. Since the N64 controller is so different than a standard Nintendo Switch controller, things can get a little wonky. In fact, using the Admiral in pretty much any game other than Turok can be a little wonky. The buttons are almost always mapped in a bizarre way. This USB adapter does allow you to use different button configurations, but it requires you to hold down certain buttons when you plug in the controller. The Admiral's dongle takes a second to connect to the controller when it's powered on, so unfortunately, you can't hold down buttons when it's booting up. So you're pretty much stuck with the standard button configuration. Honestly, I don't even know why you would want to use an N64 controller on the Switch besides Turok. Maybe if there were more N64 games coming out on the Switch. Maybe if you really wanted to, you can pretend you're from an alternate reality where Crash Bandicoot came out on the N64. I had to include this in the video because people care more about the Switch than they do about the N64. It's just how views work on YouTube. I'm so sorry, but it's also your fault. You gotta slam that bell and click on more retro gaming videos. So let's get back to the other interesting features of the Admiral. The one that's been staring you right in the face this whole time probably is that giant controller pack slot. There are only 4 accessories for the Nintendo 64 that utilize that controller pack slot. There is the transfer pack, which only works for Pokemon Stadium and Mario Golf, and that is not compatible with the Admiral. There's also the Rumble pack, which is also not compatible with the Admiral because that would be ridiculous. There's also, of course, the biosensor, which unfortunately I don't have, so I can't test it, which is fine because I'm sure not many of you are going to be using that anyway. And of course, the main attraction is the actual controller pack. That is the N64's memory card. Most N64 games use battery saves in the cartridge. If you grew up with an N64, it's possible that you never even had a controller pack memory card. Because like I said, most games are just going to have battery saves, and they hold your save file on the cartridge itself. Very few games required the memory card. There are some games that had memory card functionality and let you copy your save game to that memory card. One of those games is Perfect Dark. And with the Admiral, this little micro SD card slot over here allows you to transfer your save files from the controller pack to a micro SD card. That's awesome, but Of all of the games that I have, only 2 of them have any real practical use for this. That's Duke Nukem and Perfect Dark. I would have loved for this to work with more games like Mega Man 64. I've been working on that save file for a while, and I would love to be able to pick that back up on my laptop in an emulator. In fact, the Mega Man 64 instruction book says that it's compatible with the controller pack, but the box says otherwise. Also, I tried it and it just straight up doesn't work. Wait. It looks like some boxes have the controller pack on it and some don't. But I don't have the box in real life, so I'm just going off of Google Images. Either way, if you can get the controller pack function to work, let me know. It would also be nice to transfer my Rogue Squadron save. This game aged incredibly well, and I've gold starred every single level in the game. Look at that, man. I'm proud of that. Nothing happened. You didn't see anything. So for the very few games that require the controller pack, it's nice to have the option to be able to plug in a controller pack so that you don't need any additional controllers laying around. It works for Perfect Dark fine, but in order to enter the controller pack menu, you have to hold down the start button on boot. As we learned from before with the Switch, the Admiral takes a second to sync the controller to the dongle, so it misses this little startup window. So again, we're losing a lot of the coolness of having this controller pack slot. Being able to move saves from the controller pack to a micro SD card, though, is really cool. All you really have to do is flip this switch and wait a few seconds. It dumps an MPK file for each save on the controller pack. My emulator of choice uses SRM files. I tried using Project 64, which creates MPK files, but I couldn't for the life of me get it to read this frickin' MPK file. So there you go. It gives you an MPK file, but good luck trying to play that on your computer. The real purpose of this MPK file is probably for backup purposes. Let's say you have a really large Quest 64 save file that you've been working on for a long time and you're afraid of losing it. You can back it up to that SD card, and maybe years later you get a new N64 or you lost the save somehow. You can just put it right back on another controller pack and start where you left off. Assuming you still have the Admiral controller. Unless by then there's some new futuristic micro SD card to controller pack adapter that I don't know about yet. This solves a very niche problem. I'm glad that the controller pack and micro SD card slots are there because it doesn't seem to have contributed too much to the cost of the unit, but it's ultimately not as exciting as it initially sounded. Now, if I could put my freaking Game Boy Pokemon saves in there via the transfer pack, or maybe even my Game Boy camera save files, then you can put me down for like 1 billion of these things. If any of you homebrew boys want to figure that out, you let me know. I'll put a bounty on it. If any of you figure that out, I will donate 1 bean burrito to my belly after I finish this video. And don't worry, you can play Pokemon Stadium with this controller. I tried it, and you can use the transfer pack. It just has to be plugged into Player 2. So if you really want to play your Pokemon save file on the big screen, you can do it this way. Again, a very niche problem. So, this is the best N64 controller to date. You might want to keep an old one around for certain things like using a transfer pack or messing with controller pack data transfers. But for the main purpose of playing these archaic 3D games comfortably, this is the way to go. And of course, if you just can't get enough of Turok on your Switch, here you go nuts. So what do you guys think about the Admiral controller or just modernized N64 controllers for the Switch? Is this something you'd be interested in? Does this solve a problem that you have? Is there any use case that this fits into that I maybe neglected, that I haven't seen yet? Leave it in the comments below, add me on Twitter, any and all of this other social media garbage. Of course, we got Amazon links to everything that I talked about in the description below. Those help support the channel. We also got new videos and live streams all the time. Our schedule is usually the pinned tweet over on Twitter. We got Wulff Den live every single Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern time here on YouTube. It's our live podcast where we can talk about stuff like this. And streams over on twitch.tv/WulffDen. You can support us on either of those accounts. Link it to your Discord account. You can get into our supporter-only Discord where you get private chat time with us. You can get videos like this one early, and you get to play multiplayer games with us at least once a month. But of course, the most important thing that you can do to help us out is just subscribe. And when I make videos that might not necessarily play well to the YouTube algorithm, you watch them Or I don't even care, just leave it open in a tab. And just share this video with a friend that maybe you played a lot of N64 with, or that you want to play with. That way, one of you can get one of these controllers. Anyway, thank you guys very much. Have a happy and a healthy new year. That's how you say it in Italian, new year. All right, come on.